Some developments in the MLS US Open Cup story, which we discussed on our last podcast. You might recall MLS announced that they intended to have their clubs field reserve sides in the 2024 US Open Cup, but they needed approval from US Soccer to do that. And US Soccer has rejected that request. Don Garber released a statement in reaction to that, saying that he's still concerned about fixture congestion. He still thinks the Open Cup can be useful in terms of developing young players, which would benefit U.S. soccer in the long run. And so he's hopeful they can come to some sort of solution. What are your thoughts?
Oh, my goodness. All right. So now we're going back and forth and we're having battling press releases if in a war, the wars that we talk about, these press releases going back and forth. Again, I find this incredibly silly. I find this incredibly tedious. And, not that standing on principle or, believing and fighting for something you believe in when it comes to tradition shouldn't be done. But I keep looking at this, Mosse, in terms of what's coming down the pike and barreling down the pike. And that is 2026. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about, maybe some things to do going forward. But if I had a Christmas wish out there, it's that American soccer could, to the extent that they can, put away some of this crap and this baggage that we carry around and stop whatever we're doing and stop creating new problems. And so again, I think that this is like a needless and pointless and ultimately damaging and like I said, exhausting type of thing to have happen that they are going through. How does this get solved? We talked before about, potentially the legal part and lawyers getting involved, which doesn't help anybody and only costs money. The lawyers are the only ones that ultimately make that money, and money, by the way, that could be going into helping, whether it's U.S. soccer or whether it's Major League Soccer. I will say that, and I mentioned this in the previous episode, that for JT Batson, who is the CEO of U.S. Soccer, this was a kind of an inflection point. This was a moment where people were kind of looking at him and saying, what are you going to do on behalf of U.S. Soccer? And so this is kind of a stance. And in that sense, I think that this was a good look for the United States Soccer Federation to push back, not to completely blow back, but to push back. And, the competing interests that MLS have and U.S. Soccer have, that's okay. That's going to happen. But they ultimately need each other. And they're going to have to find a way to work with each other going forward. And this U.S. Open Cup hill that people seem to believe is worth dying on, I don't know if it is. I think this is all going to get worked out eventually. And the conspiracy theorist in me or out there maybe we'll look at this and say, hey, this is all a tinfoil type of new Coke, strategy, to rile up a bunch of people around an issue that, let's be honest, only a few days ago, very few cared about, and to appeal to that romance and to that emotion and that tradition. And then in doing so, to kind of bring in this newfound attention and interest that you can then leverage into, maybe something that's improved in terms of the situation. But, this doesn't say Christmas, Mosse. This doesn't say the festive spirit, does it?
Yeah, the only thing I'll say is we all intuitively understand that what's best for MLS's bottom line is not always what's best for the overall growth of soccer in this country. But it's still interesting to see MLS and U.S. soccer go head-to-head to this degree.
I also will say that, while this is being shaped and formed around the U.S. Open Cup situation, all of this U.S. Open Cup pearl clutching that is happening now and all this drama, it's really not about the Open Cup. It's really not concerned about the Open Cup, because I get that there's a lot of people out there that ultimately they just want MLS in it out of principle, and if you put 11 human beings just with the brand of the first team in MLS, that's ultimately a win. That's ultimately what they want. But that doesn't necessarily help the competition or the value on the field or the quality on the field. So this ends up, to me, feeling much more about an opportunity to stick it to the man and standing up to the elites and a power struggle and class warfare. And I get it. I'm human just like anybody else. We see it in all walks of life. There's an endorphin type of rush that comes from doing this. And, this righteous type of performance, sometimes performance art that is out there. It's a story as old as time. And so the motives or the ulterior motives of many out there when it comes to this, I tend to think about and to question. But like I said, I think that this is ultimately going to be sorted out. And MLS is going to say that they are in compliance with whatever laws and regulations and rules and contracts that they have signed, in that they still want to represent MLS in the Open Cup. The question is, are they able to have MLS Next Pro be that representation from MLS to the Open Cup and fulfill that requirement that for Division I sanctioned requires and Division III sanctioned, which is what the MLS next division is, if they're able to do that going forward. How do you think ultimately this gets resolved, Mosse? Where, if in your crystal ball?
I think MLS blinks and they end up fielding their first team squads.
And so when we get right back to it, it's just about participation, right? It's about the principle of participation, because you know as well as I do that there are plenty of MLS teams that don't want to do this and don't want their teams. And so they're going to just throw out whatever it is, and actually in the hopes that they don't go forward because it's more time. And again, the economics of this are where MLS is going to say, why should we be involved in something like this? And again, there's an argument that from an altruistic perspective, a charity perspective, this is what's good for the game. We've talked about this before. MLS as a business is going to do what is good for MLS and not necessarily the good of the game. I do think, Mosse, that this should raise questions and put more stress and pressure on the United States Soccer Federation to make, if this is going to continue on, this Open Cup is going to continue on, how are you going to make it relevant? How are you going to make fans care, broadcasters care, and I guess most importantly, how are you going to make the teams care that this is something that they want to be involved with? And when I say teams, it's MLS teams, because they only have something to lose. The cup set phenomenon that we all associate with cups is wonderful. It's romantic. It's traditional. Okay? But here's the problem, Mosse. When an MLS team loses in an Open Cup, it's then used as a proxy. It's then used to say MLS sucks or MLS isn't as good as X, Y, and Z. All right? When an EPL team loses, it's a cup set. It's a Cinderella story, but nobody ever questions the quality of that EPL team or of the EPL in general. And that's what I think MLS is guarding against. Now, they'll say they don't care about the results and the competition, and it's not about a fear out of this. But the reality is they have much more to lose than anybody else in the tournament, and much more to lose relative to other big teams and big leagues around the world that participate in Open Cups. So when you do that compare and contrast, it's not always equal. You like that clip? Well, my State of the Union podcast drops twice a week right here on my very own YouTube page. The only way to stay up to date is to hit that subscribe button down below. Size the day, and see you soon.